Okay guys, here I'm going to play hopefully a 30-minute game with Chess&Hood. Okay, so they are rated 1173. I'm currently rated 1277. Okay, so we've done a d4, d5 opening, pretty straightforward. I'm going to carry on with my standard opening that I'm playing at the moment. This is a variation on the London system. Okay, so obviously I've attacked the d5 pawn, which is already defended by the queen anyway, and black has brought out the pawn to e6 to add a second defender. It's quite standard. Normally at this point I expect one of the knights to come out, usually, yeah. So there we go, one knight is out. So one idea I've got is to, if I can, to bring my knight into b5 and then to try and get to c7 with the fork on the king and the rook, which is great. That gives you a very good advantage. Now I can't really play that at this point. I can attempt it, but if I were to play the knight in there, then black can pull the knight out to here to defend that one. Another option is to bring the bishop out there, so I'm not going to be thinking about that right now. I'm just going to carry on developing. So I've done the same thing. We've got a more or less symmetrical pattern now, but the one key difference is, this is something that you quite often see with the London system, is that my dark squared bishop, so I've got this set of pawns here, this nice chain going on. Oops. And but my dark squared bishop is outside of this dark square pawn chain. Black on the other hand has their pawns on light squares, but their light squared bishop is stuck behind that pawn chain, which is not so good for them. So now, is there any point in going in for this attack? No, he's still got bishop to d6. So I'm just going to keep normal developing moves. And now I've got 3 of my minor pieces out in the game at this point, whereas black only has 1. Now he's got 2, but again that bishop is really not in a very good place. He's only really got 2 forward squares that he can come to. He's got that a6 and c6. c6 isn't really very good, so I think that's a poor bishop. Next I'll just carry on. So now all 4 of my minor pieces are out. Then all I need to do is castle, and that's my development more or less complete. I'm not too concerned with this. The black's dark square bishop is black's good bishop, right? That it has all the movement between, it can get between and around these pawns, right? So if black wants to trade off that good bishop for my knight that's only just really developed, that's not a problem for me. I'm quite happy to entertain that. I'm going to move my queen forward to d2, just so I can recapture with the queen rather than have to recapture with the pawn on b2. Just keeps my setup a little bit tidier. Now I think we should put the question to the dark squared bishop. Are you serious about this challenge, or are you just having a feel around? And let's see what black decides. Got to remind myself, this is a 30-minute game. Black is playing their moves pretty quickly. So we've had, what, 5 or 6 moves already, and black's only used 1.5 minutes of game time. So now comes my question. I'm going to recapture with the queen because I can see that this pawn here on c7 is only defended once by black's own queen. So I'm going to recapture there and maintain my pawn structure. It means I've got a pawn still on every file, so that gives me lots more options to push my pawns forward, create a nice nice chain on the board. Black's brought knight out again to d7, where it can't really advance very far because the only forward squares it's got to go to are guarded by pawns. So I'm pretty good with that. The one thing that does do is it might prevent my knight from jumping into e5, which is a lovely place for my knight to end up. Black only has one bishop on the board, whereas I have two. If I can keep both bishops on the board up to the end of the game, then the two bishops, if they're paired, can work really well together. Bishops become more powerful very often towards the end of the game. So I'm now thinking about castling. Do I want to castle on the king's side or on the queen's side? I tend to favour the sharpness of castling on the opposite side to my opponent, because I just like the idea of pawn storms. So the principle here is that, you know, I've got these nice pawns on the G and H files that can just stomp up the board and try and mess up black's defences on that side of the board. Black may also have a similar idea. Of course, it works both ways when you do opposite side castling. So let's have a sip of beer and let's have a review of the situation. This is a pretty conventional kind of London system setup. One idea I might have, which is quite common for me playing players at around this level, is to try and drop my light square bishop back, maybe here to c2 or even b1, put my queen on the same diagonal, and then all I need to do is get rid of this knight somehow with a pawn or a bishop attack, and then my queen can dive straight in for a checkmate there on h7. So is that on the cards at this point? I don't see any problem. Right, my dark square bishop here, okay, is outside of my pawn chain, and that's okay. So I think if I move my queen back, then I've got ideas of pushing that pawn forwards, then the bishop can drop back, then my queen can push forwards. It's a little bit complicated, but there's nothing really terribly important going on the board right now, so I think I have some time to do that. There's no real challenges. All of black's pieces are on the first three ranks on their side of the board. Right, so you know, there isn't a knight in here attacking, or there's no bishop, and the queen hasn't moved right yet. So I think this is the interesting knight. This knight is much better. This one, as we've seen, can't really go anywhere and is just blocking off the queen. This bishop is pretty useless as well. Black's only real options for play involve maybe these queenside pawns, and then possibly the knight that's currently on f6. So I might, yeah, I don't really, oh there you go, so it's the queenside pawns he's decided to go with. So I'm just going to carry on with my plan. If the pawn pushes, then I can drop my bishop back, and my queen can then go in here to c2. Oops, got to make sure I don't do a pre-move there by accident. If the pawn takes, I'll recapture with the pawn on the e file, thereby maintaining that bit of protection for my king. And then I'll probably also want to move one of my rooks into the centre, probably this one on d, to the centre to control that semi-open file, but that hasn't happened at this point. That's okay. I'm going to drop my bishop right back to b1, and let's see if black picks up on my idea. Again, I've got this feeling that black is not really attacking with much intent at this time. One of the things I have to think about now is if black chooses to capture c5 takes d4, do I recapture with the pawn, or do I recapture with the knight on f3? I can't see much play for having the knight. If the knight goes here to d4, it can't advance there, f5, can't take there, can't go there, there's two pieces in the way, and that is actually there's a thought. I mean, it's then got the option of trying to get into d6 and forking the rooks and that bishop. So how likely is that? I mean, that's still taking the pawn, then another jump, and then another move without black realizing what I'm doing and just moving his knight out of the way so the queen attacks that square. I think that's asking too much. So I think I'm just going to recapture with the pawn, and I'm just hovering just to check that there's nothing silly that I've missed. The only thing that could be troublesome right now is this knight coming in to attack my queen. If that happens, I will probably be forced to capture with the bishop. I mean, if it does, if that knight does come into here, it's also threatening f2 and a fork. But if I move my, sorry about the dogs, if I move my queen then back to c2, I could even tempt him, you know, to go for that. That might be an idea, to try and, you know, oops. So that's my last move. Yeah, so if the knight comes in, I think I'll just move my queen to c2 as though I'm just getting out of the way, and see if somehow I can encourage him to come in. My connection's just gone down briefly for a second. That should come back in a second. But it gives us still time to sit back and take stock of the game. Okay, it's come back on. I'm pleased to see that my opponent is now starting to take a bit more time. Another option I've got is to move my knight into e5, and then if black wants to recapture, I recapture with the bishop, which then gives me that nice option to clear that knight out of the way at any time. But first, before I do that, I have to get my queen onto this light square diagonal. Otherwise my threat is not imminent enough. So we're waiting on seeing what black is deciding to do. Pretty quiet queen move. I mean, that queen now cannot move forward. It can't advance on that dark square diagonal at all. I don't really see big value in that. What can I do? Let's bring the knight in. I'm going to try this one and see if black fancies the exchange. And if that exchange happens, then it's going to put me in a stronger position. It's also going to mean that my bishop is now then eyeing up the g7 square, which is a nice target. So then, you know, maybe I might have ideas of bringing my rook, swinging my rook around. Yeah, okay, so he's gone for the exchange. That's good. Now, if I take with the bishop, black does not have to move the knight straight away. I don't want him to move the knight straight away. If I took with a pawn, he would have to move the knight because, you know, if I take with the bishop now, he can recapture. Oh dear, oh no, I'm being chased around. Okay, so my next move is almost certainly going to be f3. Even if black attacks my bishop, say with f6 here, then I can counter attack with that. Try and get black to move. Oh, that's interesting actually. The knight can then move back to g5, which is then guarding the h7 square. I'm not entirely happy about that, but it wouldn't be too hard to bump him out of the way again by playing h4 or even f4. So this is a king safety issue right now. You know, the most pressing challenge for black is king safety, because there is an imminent checkmate threat. If black made a silly move now, like that capture, which would be silly anyway, but the queen could come in to h7 with check. The only move the king has would be f8, and then the queen moves into h8, and that's checkmate. So my internet connection has gone down again. It's not ideal for making live chess game videos. But if it does this, it normally only happens for a minute. Another option I could consider is maybe moving my bishop down to, say, g3 and trying to tempt the knight into capturing the bishop, in which case my queen dives in and the game is over. Well, let's see. How long have I got? I've got 1.5 minutes. Let me check my network cable hasn't popped out of the computer. That can happen sometimes. Let's see if it comes back on now. I do like to play, when I'm playing on chess.com, I like to play in the focus mode, so it gets rid of all of the other stuff on the screen that you don't need to look at, so that you can really concentrate on what's going on the board. This is unfortunate. I've got less than a minute now that the connection has to come back. Is YouTube working? Yeah, YouTube seems to be working. It's just chess.com that isn't working. Okay, that's it. It's come back up. Phew! That's good news. Okay, so it's now attacking my bishop. So I'm going to bring my bishop down here. I think that's the safest plan. If I attack the knight, okay, so if I do pawn f3 and black takes the bishop and I take the knight, and then black takes back with that pawn is then backed up with this bishop, right? So I'm not too comfortable about that. I would rather move my bishop out of the way and see if black is tempted to try and capture. Of course, now that pawn has moved, the king does have an escape square. But even so, I think we're in a strong position, because if let's say black takes, then the queen can come in to h7 with check. The king has to move to one of these two squares. If it goes there, the queen comes in, and then the king has to move to here. But if the queen is on h7, let's say go to there, then I can also bring the bishop in to g6 to back that up as well. And then if the queen then goes to h8, that would be checkmate. So let's see what black's idea is here. Taking the bishop now, I think, would be a serious mistake. If nothing else, it means I can capture a pawn, give check, so the king has to move. Then I can take the knight, probably with the pawn on h2, which then opens up the h-file for my rook as well. The question is, has black spotted the threat? Another option for black here might be to just move the pawn up to there. Okay, this is interesting. So now I think, yeah, this is good. Okay, I like the fact that the rook's gone there, because now if I play this and the knight moves away, say with a bishop capture, queen captures h7 with check. The only move the king has is then there on f7, and then my bishop can follow up behind the queen, and that, I believe, would be checkmate. So if it goes that way, if black now goes ahead and captures the bishop, I think that's going to be game over. Similarly, if he, oops, okay, he's moved out of the way, I think that is going to be the same story. Doesn't really matter what black does now. The king is in check. Moving the knight back isn't an option, because he's got to move the king. So the bishop then comes in, and that's checkmate. Well done. Okay, so what have we learned from this game? It's a relatively simple attack. You know, the idea of moving in with you know, a piece like the queen that's backed up by another piece is one of the simpler types of checkmate that you can do. Okay, and quite honestly, you know, black was unable to spot the threat to the king.